Alors, bonsoir. Je suis très heureux et fier d'accueillir Monsieur Tom Sherman, un vidéographe, ce soir. Tom Sherman a eu une longue et illustre carrière dans les arts, gagnant le prix de gouverneur général, le prix de Bell. Il est actuellement professeur, directeur du département à l'Université de Syracuse à New York. Moi, j'ai rencontré Tom il y a 30 ans, quand il était le chef de la section des arts médiatiques à la Conseil des arts du Canada. Et nous, à cette époque-là, nous avons présenté une demande pour un festival, le festival de poésie Ultimatum. C'était grâce à l'appui de Tom Sherman que nous avons pu faire ce festival qui a grandement marqué Montréal, la communauté artistique à Montréal à cette époque. Nous avons invité les gens comme John Giorno et Kathy Acker et d'autres. Mais pendant que nous avons fait ça, Tom m'a parlé d'un autre projet. Un autre projet qui était quand même m'a marqué beaucoup depuis. Et c'était un homme qui, à l'époque, a construit un projet artistique basé sur les statistiques de baseball. Un homme qui était quand même avec une quantité de données inimaginable, a conçu un projet pour créatifs utilisant ces données-là. C'était un projet fou, un projet impossible, un projet bizarre. Mais Tom, il a dit, si c'était à moi à décider, j'appuierais ce genre de projet. Parce que cet homme-là, il a une vision tout à fait autre, tout à fait nouvelle, tout à fait intéressant. Alors, depuis ces 30 ans, cette rencontre avec Tom m'a marqué beaucoup parce que j'ai posé beaucoup de questions de qu'est-ce que c'est l'art, qu'est-ce que pourrait être de l'art et comment une institution et l'État peut appuyer la communauté artistique. Alors, je suis donc très heureux, après 30 ans, d'inviter Tom à nouveau à Montréal, bien à Vidéographe et ici. Et il va nous présenter quelques nouvelles vidéos. One of the things, of course, we're very happy that Tom Sherman is here this evening. I'm going to repeat now the same thing in English. For the viewers, one of the things that Videograph is trying to do is to present these events not only for the public, a live public, but also to record them for participants over the net. And so we're recording tonight, and we'll edit this down, and it will, the talk will be available probably in the next couple of weeks. But one of the Tom, one of the things I spoke about was your work at the media as the head of the Media Arts in supporting the Ultimatum Poetry Festival, which was, I have to tell you, at the time was a fairly large event for us, and throughout its conception, it was consistently kind of bringing forth a cascade of monumental failures. And so as we tried to put on this festival, and the money ran out, and and the artists didn't appear, we were able, of course, to finally put it on. But it was the support of the council, and your support in particular, that kind of championed the project, which allowed the project to go forward, and it allowed, I think it marked the Montreal community for throughout the period of the 80s by giving us a close connection with, you know, an avant-garde in New York and elsewhere, bringing up John Giarno and Kathy Acker. And as I described in French, one of the things at that time was you talked about another artistic project that was not funded, which could never be funded, an impossible project. And it was a sheaf of papers, maybe 2 or 3 inches thick. And this was the application that somebody had made. And it was an impossible intellectual effort which involved the creation and the compilation of thousands and thousands of statistics, baseball statistics. And the person had an idea to create a work of art using this material. And it was at once mad and extraordinary at the same time. But when you presented this, it was quite extraordinary for me at the time as a young artist to see that, you know, that what could be, what was artistic expression? What could it be conceived as? And how could an institution as important as the Canada Council, how could they fund such work or not fund such work? And how that the institution of the Canada Council would have an influence in creation of art through the years to come. And it was something that has marked my thinking since. Hence, we're very happy to welcome you here this evening, Mr. Tom Sherman.
Well, thank you, Fortner, for those memories. In fact, the person that submitted that application was Tony Formo, F-O-R-M-O. And Tony Formo was a cab driver who had aspirations to be an artist. He used to send me cassette tapes titled Psychoeconomics, 1, 2, 3, 4. He probably sent me 30. Right. I have no idea what happened to Tony Formo, but he was pretty exceptional, and he believed in the pursuit of the space to make art, right? And he chose to be a working man rather than an institutionalized man, so that he would have the proper space to be creative. And we corresponded for a number of years, but I lost touch with him after the council. But so maybe we'll dedicate this screening to Tony Formo. So thank you very much. It's really wonderful to be here because the Videograph is such an important institution historically, and I'm also very pleased to see it moving in the direction it's moving. I'm appreciative of the people that have come to hear me talk tonight and to see my tapes with me and to talk with me. But it's also very interesting to possibly reach an audience outside. So tonight what I want to do is I want to present really a work which was, it's conceived of because of the form that the Videograph gave me. Fortner wrote me a letter. He said, I'd like you to write a text and I'd like you to have some works that you would like to put online in our system. And I thought about the possibility of that, and since I have a propensity for writing about what I'm doing, this was the perfect opportunity. So I've created a suite of works, of video works, which is called Everything for Someone. And that's kind of the opposite of something for everyone, right? I think we have a kind of, even though we've had a complete degeneration of large-scale audiences, right, due to the fragmentation that's occurred especially through the culture of messaging. It's really, really rare for people to have viral hits or to have universal works of art that reach a number of different cultures from a single perspective. Right? And so what I was trying to do was think of a way to create something that respected a smaller audience, right? And perhaps an audience really of one kindred spirit. So why shoot too high? Let's be realistic. So the first thing, the starting point for this is that I read a report by Cisco Systems, and Cisco Systems is the largest producer of servers for internet video, and they basically control the market. but there are other competitors that write the same type of literature. So it's in their interest to say how much volume of video messaging there's going to be, because they're trying to sell these switchers. And they're trying to sell the ability to organize your online video. So Cisco Systems said about 2 years ago that by 2014, the present year, the amount of information that's moving on the internet, the amount of video that's moving through the internet globally, it will take 72 million hours for one individual to watch that material. And that will double in the next 5 years. Right? So that's a pretty serious volume of information. So it's kind of like it's meaningless, because it's like how many cigarettes end to end does it take to go to the moon? It's a mathematical, computation. But there's a lot of video, and there's more video than we can possibly deal with. Hence all of the obsession with all kinds of abilities, artificial intelligence, search mechanisms, et cetera, for finding what we want in this abundance. So we're living in an era of abundance, and it's really happened. So given that, and the fact that the audience is changing, right? So the audience, because it is in a messaging culture, and the material that is available to everybody is now environmental, they're looking at things differently. And it's not just a question of a shrinking attention span, right? It's really a whole different attitude towards information. Like, for instance, we used to have things called television and cinema, where people spent hours concentrating on a single message. Even today we have that being punctuated by people. If you go to the cinema, there's always somebody next to you with their phone. And it started with advertising puncturing message forms in the 20th century, and now it's gotten to the point where literally we can say that our attention, no matter how wired we are or not wired we are, our attention is really now like a kind of a perforated veil. Right? So, somebody like John Cage would say a contemporary work of art, if a phone rings now and I'm talking, if this is really a contemporary activity, that shouldn't really break the activity. The noise and the punctuation, the perforation of the environment is happening. It is environmental. So when we're making video, and I've been making video for a long time. I started making video in 1970, right? So I have a fair bit of experience making messages in the video form. I think my attitude towards making video messages is changing. In other words, I think I used to think that what I was making was going to last for a long time, and that there will be multiple viewers over time. I mean, I was looking at that very optimistically. And I think my work probably in the past was more identifiably art. Right? And I'm not so interested in making art that looks like art now. Right? So that's a whole other thing. So I'm still making what I consider to be video messages, which are art, but it's not a concern of mine to make them look like art and to seclude them from the broader environment. So this is a kind of an opportunity to set up what I consider to be a kind of a constellation of messages. So I started to think about this environment, and if this environment was so vast that it would take 72 million years, it's almost like space travel, for me to travel through this environment, to look, and as proficient as I am at identifying things that are kindred spirits, it's still a very difficult and long journey. Now, I have faith, NASA's proving that, looking for a needle in the haystack is going to become common, right? So all of that security software, which is generating all of our the perforations in our private system, that's going to be within my own hands. That's going to be software that I'm going to be able to use. That's just a natural thing. There's going to be better and better tools for me to go out into that 72 million year, or double that. Right? Now what I'm looking for when I go out, it's almost like the Milky Way. Right? It's like there's this kind of silky cloud of messages, right? And I'm looking for a constellation. And so what I've used in this system that Videograph has offered me, I thought, well, it'd be interesting to create a constellation artificially, right? A cluster of messages which will help define me and will help define the audience. Now, the first important thing to say is that that 72 million years of video is a topographical map of a perceptual series of statements that essentially is a map of the audience. That's the part that's encouraging, is that the people that are making messages now are not separate from the people who are listening or watching messages, because we've gone from a culture which was a secular group of people that were producing to a full transceiver culture. So almost everybody that's making messages is looking at messages. And those people that are making and configuring their messages are essentially giving away a map of a potential audience. So in a way, by showing you 10 messages in a constellation, what I'm doing is I'm creating a map of what it is that I find interesting. Right? So I'm not, I'm not obscuring my interest, I'm increasing it. And if you look at that duality creates tremendous potential for micro-communication, but micro-communication that's more elaborate than a single message in a stew, in an undulating stew, a galaxy of communication. The idea that there could be maybe one message, perhaps it would allow people to begin to link and to find that constellation, but the array is the important part. The array over time will allow people to focus on the micro experience, which is a point of light within that broader spectrum. So that's the kind of model that I'm trying to create. And I hope that even though my messages are modest and they are art that doesn't look like art, I'm hoping that the nuances within that creates a very, very peculiar and special and particular array or constellation of messages, which allows people to feel as though they're getting something worth their effort. Because everybody else is pissing in the ocean, you know. You can make the most elaborate statements, right, in terms of creating a point of light within that spectrum, hoping to gather audience as if audience was a series of magnetic particles that was coming to your particular point of view. It just seems to me erroneous and perhaps more far-fetched than to create something which is more focused as an array. So that's the idea. I'm hoping with this experience of showing you this group of 10 articles in video that you will have a greater understanding of where I'm coming from, and hopefully there is someone that can adopt that universe, and there will be everything for someone. It's a model. Okay? Now with that said, I think what I'd like to do is I'd just like to play the first series of them. The whole set is, the tapes are all, the video, the tapes, that ages me, I love that phrase. The tapes, I actually still have I have a digital, an HD tape machine that I use quite often. But the video that I've recorded for you, I'm going to show the first 6, and then they divide up into sort of 20-odd minute segments. So with that opening, that's what I'd like to do. And now I'd like to show the first 6 of this array of 10. And then I'll remember the things that I wanted to say to you now, and I will complement that, but I'd also get some feedback from you if I can. And then we'll pursue the rest of those tapes. So that's what I have to offer, okay? Where those bumblebee kind of objects were, there's a site of a UFO sighting at Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia, which apparently is one of the, I'm not a big follower of UFO sightings, but apparently it's one of the 3 not discredited sightings in the world. So, you know, it has a particular attraction. And then I was hoping that we would see a man named Otis perform Billie Jean at a place called Alley 9. He does a remarkable job. So there's a beautiful karaoke piece. That was when I said it was missing. All that aside, so you begin to see the possibilities of creating messages where you concentrate on the aesthetics in terms of the form and the content and the relationships of the two, and to see them as video messages as a kind of a concert, right? And I'm hoping that you will identify with what it is that interests me, spatially, geographically, in my relationships with other people, etc. So that's the first suite. Are there any comments or questions from that initial exposure?
Can we see 5, 6?
What we just we saw 4.5 of 6. Nothing essential happens in the absence of noise. Let's do it that way.
So
Yeah.
you mentioned that these works did not resemble art.
Right. Well, they don't knock on the screen and say, "This is art. Be careful. This is art." A lot of art does. Right? A lot of art looks like art. That's why people, and they feel good about that because then they know it's art.
So could you talk a little bit more about why these don't resemble art? Or what is it about these that differentiate?
Well, I'm saying that as an artist who made them, I could recognize them as art. But I'm not particularly interested in doing a tautological presentation. Right? Like, let's say I was working with abstraction. Pretty much people would probably say in a message environment, if I was working with abstraction, I was probably making art. That would be a very clear thing. Or if I, maybe the vernissage one appears to be about art, but maybe that's a deception.
Well, in each of the pieces, there's coherence. There's something's happening, and even though it's a lot of one shot, a lot of long shots there, but in the scene of the bee,
Mm-hmm.
particularly where the shapes become abstract, and so that's art.
Right.
Isn't it?
Or if we would have seen the UFO sign, we might have thought that it was a humorous concoction of a UFO sighting. But it's kind of difficult if you don't have the sign to start with. I'm handicapped, you know. Yeah, you had some.
What is your definition of art? If it's not art, what is art?
What is art?
Yeah.
Oh, you want to get right down there. Okay. I think probably my definition of art is whereas as an individual, I encounter something in reality and I complicate that. I make it more difficult than it is.
It's not art.
What is not art? Things that are not more complicated than they are. Let's just start there. Does that mean? Yeah. Somebody want to help me? I mean, you know, it's a good question. It's a good question, legitimate. But I do find that oftentimes artists do, I don't intentionally obscure things, but I tend to, when I look at things and I see them, when I make art, I tend to think that people think it's more complicated. And not so much that it's more complicated than it is, I just make it more complicated. That's part of it.
This work it seems to be very focused on a place and visually, but then sometimes the soundtrack is kind of somewhere else or
Right.
something else. So we've seen these vignettes. They're kind of very very short, not all of them. So, but would you show any of them individually, or are they really intended to be shown really in these kind of kind of in dialogue with each other in a sense, and cumulative and so on, like how
I think
what
probably
constitutes
that's a good question. I think that I probably over the years found it more interesting to show a group of short statements and to allow the space between those short statements to become important for the audience. You know, so
do you
that
see it as like shuffling a deck, as it were, where you could mix and match, or do you see it as something that you would always try to kind of orchestrate a certain way, or?
Well, I could try them in different ways, but this was not a random selection. In a way, that's why the missing pieces are problematic, because it could just be like a cloudy night, and we could see part of the constellation. Let's look at it that way. We could see part of the constellation, but that maybe the space between has just been increased, and that would be a complication that I would not enjoy for you. Right? I felt as though it was a stretch already, but when there's a perforation in the relationships, then it's more problematic. But I wouldn't say it's hard to imagine, for instance, gathering a group of people and then showing them something for 4 minutes.
No.
Right? That's pretty funny too, right? I mean, I've heard of that type of work. Robert Ashley did a piece where he spoke for 16 seconds and then he left. And people were very angry with him because they paid admission and they were expecting more. So there's no necessity for a work of art to be longer or a group of works of art to be longer, but I very seldom get an opportunity, except maybe online. Somebody might stumble across something, they might do a search, and they might go to that bumblebee sequence as a UFO sighting, right? And that's kind of interesting.
Hopefully you spoke longer.
Hmm?
Hopefully you spoke longer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that
I was just a point.
Yeah.
I want to say that from my viewer point of view, there is a ethnographic quality to the video I've seen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I sort of think that you, when you say you want to make a scene more complicated than it is investing some meaning in it. You know? And I've before coming, I've seen the tapes on the internet,
Online, yeah.
on the web, and I was telling myself that it's important to not only to look at the tape, but to look twice, at least twice.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, yeah.
Because you understand more when you look twice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which is also a kind of a difficult thing for audiences today, because audiences fear the idea of watching things twice.
Yeah.
You know, I
because
mean,
you have the feeling, according to what you said previously, you have the feeling of missing something.
yeah, yeah.
If you spend twice the time on the same thing.
Right, against that 72 million years, yeah, you could be.
I think you're asking the question of meaningful experience or meaningful interaction, you know,
Mm-hmm.
in this universe of abundance of communication.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's relevant from my point of view,
Mm-hmm.
what you're asking. And besides, each piece has its own question. You know.
Mm-hmm.
The one has to do with strangeness, the first one, you know. There is this small person, animal in a jar, you know, on the table.
Right, right.
You know,
Yeah.
you're not making a statement about it, but
Yeah.
it is there.
Yeah, yeah. Again, it's unfortunate that there's other problems. There was an audio track that slid on the first one as well. So the first one is a bit of a wash. It's much more obscure and much more complicated than I intended it to. But that woman is pointing to a statement of a pilot who saw the object that is questioned. And also that museum is being run by some women who bought a country store, and it's the kind of store that just sells a can of beans and soft drinks and some memorabilia about the sighting. So they've managed to get 2,500 visitors to a very, very small community, a community with a couple hundred people in it, and to keep this store alive, but they have no they don't adhere to the standard museum rules of authenticity, of course, because of what they're saying. So they have inflatable aliens, you know, dolls, and they have aliens in apothecary jars, and they have all types of aliens, right? They're not adverse to showing as many aliens as they can find evidence and so on. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think, this is a bit of a, do you think video is an old media?
An old medium,
Yeah.
really. It's a traditional medium, by now. If I've got 44 years in the business, right, and there are people that have 49 years that I know, as an art form, it's becoming more or less a traditional medium, right? And I think it has its challenges because the environment has changed, but also there's a lot that has come before. So it's almost like if you're a portrait painter, you have a lot of pressure on you because there's a lot of history. Well, video has a lot of history now as well, but that history is blurred or obscured by the fact that there is such an abundance now that history is buried in an avalanche, right? So I might make works maybe for another context that weren't for works for online, where I might reference more or pay more attention to the responsibility of that history. Whereas in an online forum, there's a great deal of freedom, right? But I see it as a traditional form. I just went to New Mexico and worked with graduate students that had no access or idea of what video would be. And I had no trouble talking to them about what they did, but they had no vocabulary to talk to me, which I was really surprised at, because they were of an age where you would think that they were getting a lot of their information from video.
Do you want to perhaps talk a bit about the overt political aspect of, let's say, the section dealing with the salmon farms and then the dancers? Is there a relationship between those two?
Well, the first of all, the salmon farm is my attempt to intervene in a very, very serious debate, and that debate is whether or not it's proper for people to just dump a feedlot into a beautiful, pristine bay, which happens to be the bay that I live on. Mm-hmm. So I feel as though I had to make a statement about that, and so there's a different utility than there is with the dancers. With the dancers, I just find it incredibly joyful that they are enjoying themselves, and that I, as a voyeur, derive pleasure from that. So I'm really just giving that to people as a kind of a gift. So there's there's utilities in all statements and all messages. The first one the playing with fire underwater has there's a lot of pressure there to make the intention that I have is that if people were able to watch that video and will maybe watch it twice, that they might not buy cheap salmon because it might be killing them. And my intention is that they would watch that and they would never eat salmon again, knowing that salmon that comes from the Atlantic Ocean is not Atlantic salmon in the truest sense. It's a hybrid. It's a domesticated creature, right? So that's there's a different urgency or utility there, right? I don't think people will stop dancing if I stop making tapes about them. But I did enjoy watching that video again, as I enjoyed shooting it, and I find it very interesting. It's more fun dancing yourself, but it's also really fun to see people dancing and enjoying themselves and enjoying their bodies.
And could you talk a little bit about the two harbors? I mean, what are the differences between the two harbors?
People ask that question. The thing that's interesting about those two harbors is they're both predominantly used as wharfs or sites for lobster boats, right, in Nova Scotia, and they're in the same county of Nova Scotia. They have physical differences because of where they are, right? The Moose Harbor has a beautiful natural cove that it resides in, right, and it has a softer kind of more protected feel to it. It also generates a different artifice, right? The boats are different. The boats are painted different. They're all the same boats in terms of being hardy, although they're The Edna and I is a tiny boat. I don't know, I really don't know. That's just something, you look at it, it's a lobster boat. If those lobster fishermen are licensed to be able to take out 250 traps, that boat probably had 30 traps, 40 traps. It was a very modest amount of traps. So that means that that person was probably only fishing with 100 traps, say, right? Which is instead of 250. You have to have 250 traps in order to get enough lobster to make a living, right?
Or that person wasn't going out as far, so that person had a license to fish along the coast.
Yeah, maybe, or just by nature wanted to stay more close. The Hunts Point Harbor, it's just a little bit of a raw. It's a little bit raw, although they're both very, very precious environments. I think we shot that in the fall. We shot that before dumping day, which was in, what is it, November?
End of November.
End of November. So it was very, very unseasonably warm, and they were just about ready to go out and dump their traps. And basically, there's a gunshot, and they go out and they set their traps in a specific area. So I guess what I'm really looking at is the nature of the geophysical environment, the people who are residing in those two harbors, how they decorate and name their boats, and I'm really probably mostly interested in the space, or in this particular case, the Pacific kind of quality that they both have and their differences. And I tried to separate it with that shot of the seals, right, which is kind of, it's not really between them, but it allowed me to have those two particular scenes. But I want you to lean into the video, right? I want you to look at it and not say, pretty boats. I'm not going to look at this anymore. I want you to look at it, to look at the care that they put in the roping, It's just amazing, like the amount of detailing. And if you make a mistake in the roping, your hand is overboard and dead, right? If you do this wrong, the traps come off in strings of 10, and they hit somebody in the head, they're dead, right? Basically, so there's a lot of care, but it's quite beautiful the way they organize their things. So I guess it's mostly an appreciation by me, and to try to help you lean into it and maybe just see it differently.
Too bad he wasn't wrestling with Stephen Harper.
Yeah, that's a good prospect. Yeah, that video of Harper, that was actually before he was elected, and I think we shot that. The CBC was on strike, so I had the only video equipment, and all the politicians played to me, and we never imagined that he would be elected. I mean, it was just, or that he would still. I mean, it's pretty astounding, when you think about it. And he was such an uninteresting person. What can I say?
It was his summer barbecue tour.
Yeah, that was how they cleaned him up, because he had made a couple of really stupid statements in the media, and they wanted to humanize him, so they sent him around on a bus to give people sausages. And apparently that's how politics work, which is amazing. It's very direct. You feed people, and then they vote for you. And everybody's vote counts one, so there, you can see there's some people that are not the brightest lights on a tree in the audience. So that's interesting in retrospect. I think when I looked at this screening now, I chose to show the pieces from the most recent pieces first, because I wanted that part of that history to kind of inform the work. And I've been very interested in vernacular forms, karaoke, wrestling, and there's a great tradition in Montreal and in Quebec with wrestling. Yeah, it's just not only is it loved by the people, but there's been a lot of people that have looked at wrestling as a symbolic form and have done things with it. So it's really nice to show it here. But those two people, they were playing to about 70 people in Liverpool, Nova Scotia, and they were working really hard, and they were really good at what they did. And of those 70 people, 35 of them were children, and they paid half of the $10 fee. So you can imagine. And then they would get into a compact car and drive to Halifax. They'd first go to what was the restaurant?
Subway.
Yeah, the subway, you know, and they would load up on food, and then they would get in the car, and I could only imagine the cramps that they got in these little cars on the way home, you know, because they work so hard. And some of them were wrestling close to 45, 50 years old. They're still wrestling. That's real action wrestling. And then I just had a visitor from Germany, a young man who was doing wrestling as performance art, and I showed him the tape, and he knew the wrestlers and knew their entire history, and he had learned all about wrestling through action figures. But he knew everything. I mean, he was astounding. So, there any questions or comments about the last 4 tapes?
Talk a little bit about your access, because especially with the Harper video, you had quite close access under the and you know, very little interaction with the camera.
Yeah, well, again, that was, you know, my wife Jan said we ought to go down and see this. This is great. You'll see how politics work. You know, like here's going to be a conservative picnic. You know, so it wasn't our affiliation. We just went to just see it as an event, and then it turned out that Bobby Curtola, who was Canada's rock and roll legend from the early '60s. Yeah, he wrote the Coke ad. Things go better with Coca-Cola. It was kind of one of his classics, and then he had several hits in the early '60s. Yeah,
And
but
then he wrote Fortune Teller, it's his song.
Yeah, so it was when all the bobbies. There were a lot of bobbies in pop music at that
It
time.
was Canada's Bob.
Yeah, so he showed, and he was kind of the competition for Harper. But then it turned out that they knew each other from, you know, it's a long story. But the irony is the CBC was on strike, and they had been on strike for 3 weeks or something. So the politicians were dying for some camera. And I had headphones on, and I kind of looked the part, and they would just stand 3/4. They would just kind of present themselves, and then they would do their thing, you know. So it wasn't, huh?
They never questioned you?
Well, a couple of their men would come and say, you know, like, who are you with? And I'd say, well, I'm independent, or, you know, I'd make some, you know, so. But they were checking me out, and they were frustrated, but they wondered what network I was from, you know. But the politicians didn't ask that. They just posed. And it was quite remarkable, because I had never been in a situation where I had so much power with the camera. It was crazy. It was like I would just walk through the thing, and people would just assemble themselves and start performing, you know. So it was pretty easy to edit, because it just kind of happened the way you saw it. I mean, there wasn't that much between it. So, yeah.
Just following up on that, can you talk a little bit about the dynamics of what happens when these people are self-fashioning for your camera, and then you're also self-fashioning for us, like through this kind of presentation, and through the making of the videos.
Yeah.
Can we talk about how that dialogue is together?
I'm not sure I quite understand what you.
Like you have, the wrestlers presenting this spectacle and making themselves into
Right,
action
right.
figures, right? And
Right.
you have the politicians that are presenting themselves to the camera and making themselves into the prime minister. And then you have Tom Sherman making these videos and then presenting them to us through the videograph stand.
Yeah. Well, I think in a way I am attracted to these. They're spectacles. Right? I mean, they're professional circumstances. That's the thing about the karaoke thing as well. Where there's this guy Otis, and probably when he was 10, he started singing like Michael Jackson at his parents' house, and then everybody would say, "Sing like Michael Jackson," and he really can sing like Michael Jackson. And I think that I'm kind of a witness to these spectacles, but then I guess the question is how to contextualize them. In this case, the question, the guy that asked about what is art or whatever, the idea of putting that voiceover on the wrestlers, kind of, it makes it more than just their performance. Their performance is magnificent. In fact, every time I watch it, I realize how difficult it is for the audience to listen to what I'm saying, because, they're spectacular, right? So it's like, yeah. So you almost. Yeah, you almost need to. And the great compliment was when I watched this online in my office with this German fellow, and he said, "Did you broadcast that live at the event?" I thought that was so sweet, you know, because we did try to mix it so that it was true, you know, true to the space. But he really bought it, you know, which is always really funny. I find the people that are the most gullible are the people that make media, and myself included. I'm often fooled by mixes, you know, like I'm not skeptical or cynical about it. So, but I think it's just a question of. I think probably you're making connections that I didn't make. You know, I mean, in the context of here, I mean, the politicians are like, they are performing like the wrestlers. You know, it's pretty clear here. But in that context, what I usually do when I'm in any situation is whether it's those bees, or I'm just trying to get it right. You know, there's something that I see that I find fascinating, and I wanna record it, and then I just try to get it right. And if I get it right, it's something that's worth working with, you know. And so even though I'm not calling attention to my camera, I'm also happy with the camera, you know. And in the case of the wrestling match, you know, a single camera of any action, you know, it's like trying to shoot a hockey game with a single camera. It's impossible, right? And the wrestling can be challenging. And the irony is that those people would have actually, I could have gone right in the ring with them, but I didn't trust them. In fact, they took our daughter who was making signs, you know. You can't imagine how involving wrestling is. I mean, it's you know, when people say it's fake and all that, you know, it's like, it's got nothing to do with that. It's like when you're there, you are completely transformed by it. And so our daughter came and she was making signs, and they came and got her, and they took her in the ring, and they had her up on their shoulders, and they were parading her around. and they would have let me go in the ring, but they would have done something to me. You know, I don't think they would have body slammed me, but you know, but I was smart enough to not go in the ring. But I could stand on a chair and be right there, you know, and they didn't care at all. I mean, this whole idea that people care about cameras and that they protect their image. I mean, these people were just dying to get audience, so they knew, like many artists do, you know, you just do things in front of cameras because that's how people know about you, you know. So the politicians and the wrestlers in that case were pretty similar. They were hungry. They were hungry for a relationship with me.
How do you approach the people that you're filming? Well, those are two examples, but there's the dancing scene.
Yeah.
So you're there, but there's the voyeuristic aspect,
Right.
Which is yeah, I don't know how you negotiate that, but it's. What about the people you're filming? Do you ever get?
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting. Even in the course of Jan and I started to go to this club around 2006, 2007. And then only at Jan's encouragement did I start to bring a camera to this club where the dance was inside. And that's a karaoke club. And that dance floor, those people know me now. You know, by the time I'm there and I'm shooting them, they already know me. I've already shot their karaoke performances, and they in a way, they trust me. But also during that period from 2006 on, there are more and more cameras. So, you know, so now if somebody jumps up and does something, everybody's got their phones up. So now I'm fighting for space, right? And that's how short a time that is. That's only, you know, that's like a 6, 7, 8 year period. It's gone from you're there and you're the voyeur, and why are you there? And they would ask me initially because I was carrying a big camera. I wasn't carrying a phone, and then I was sitting in a lawn chair, and then I would sit with a monopod, and I would just be there. So I was a kind of a pervert in that way, you know. They just saw me as a very unusual person, and then they would ask me what I'm going to do with it. And eventually, we did feed it back into audiences. We would make programs, and then we would give them the CD. So we gained their confidence. But every once in a while, there would be somebody there from Ontario. And in Ontario, they're very self-conscious of their image in terms of surveillance, maybe much like the British are. And they would say, "What are you doing?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm just shooting, you know, for myself." And he says, "You're not shooting me, you know, I can sue your ass." And I had 2 women be very aggressive with me, and then you just take the camera off, you know. And in the same respect, I haven't, like with those that was at a wedding. I didn't know those people. I had just a little flip cam at the time, and I shot the people outside, you know, and
The guys who are dancing?
yeah, and they were not.
Drunk?
They were drinking, yeah. They weren't drunk out of their minds or anything. I think that they were fine with me shooting. I mean, they didn't, you know.
Yeah, they play active for you.
Yeah. I think that part of that whole thing is a put on, you know, like you're watching me kind of thing. But they, you know, they're displaying. I thought that couple were a really great dance couple. I wondered how much they knew each other before they danced. You know, it seemed like it was very tight. You know, in fact, I just learned something, you know, about that whole thing coming down the way he does it. It's beautiful. Like it's
I've been
instructive.
trying to teach Tom Breers because so I was just thinking that one of the real privileges of living in smaller places is that to entertain yourself, you go, when the teen bands are playing at the local theater, you go hear them and you
Yeah.
stand up for the lobster fishermen who are fighting the fish farm, and then you get to know the lobster fishermen, and you get to go out on the boats, and you know,
Yeah.
just one thing follows.
Yeah.
And,
Well, in the case of that free fall video, which I'm very fond of as well, it was part of a release when my parents died. We were going to these, just by proximity, we were going to these carnival situations, which are fantastic. And but we saw this band called Evicted perform, and the overweight kid that basically gets up and that's the first time he sang in public, and he's got an audience, right, and he's just jumping off the cliff. You know, he's 15 and he's getting ready, and you can feel it, right? And then, you know, by the time he says keep on rocking, he's kind of getting it going. And it turned out that I ran into him a couple of years later, and he said, I really want to thank you, because I looked him up and I posted the video so he could see it. He said, I wanted to thank you because people don't understand that those bands, it's like sports. It's the first time you've ever done anything that you're any good at. And it's so important towards developing your self-esteem and
important to be good at something.
yeah. And he really thanked me, and he's now a lobster fisherman. He told us if we ever came down to his town, he'd give me a big feed of lobster and introduce me to his father. And, you know, he was very, very proud of that. And that was, you know, a significant moment. And all of those sort of those high school bands, those are two bands that formed. Evicted literally was evicted from a church. They used to practice in a church, and they were evicted because they were too loud. And so they became evicted. And these bands, they form when these kids are 15, 16, and then by the time they're 17, 18, they blow apart. And then that's it. So they're very, very short. They're meteoric, you know, in that respect. And they're beautiful, you know, in their own way. So it's kind of special to be able to catch them. It's just like catching it's almost like catching a particular activity by a wild species or something. You know, it's like, to me, it's like it's in the environment, but people just overlook it, and it's very significant. And you're right. I mean, in a smaller environment, you get to make the work and then feed it back to the people you're making it of, and you learn from them, and you gain their trust and their respect. You know, so it's a kind of cool thing.
Building off of what Felicity said, what kind of emerged for me tonight, looking at this constellation of works, is kind of the space behind the camera, and you start to really get a sense of who this person is behind the camera and what kind of interests them. And there is this really wonderful kind of observational, like Jean-Pierre was saying, this sort of anthropological or ethnographic look, like you're kind of dropped into like a little tribe somewhere where you kind of see it. I mean, I know you've talked about like kind of like working with nature, like sort of urban experience is over documented, and seeing like small communities is also like really somehow unusual. Like in a way, these aren't like environments that we have access to. So anyway, those are all comments about what I kind of see emerging from the constellation. But the question I kind of want to ask you is, I heard someone say that you said this once, and I hope it doesn't sound like an insult, but they said, and I don't feel it's really true looking at the work, but they said that you said that it should take as much time to make the work as it does to look at it.
And I think there is this really marvelous kind of immediacy about the work.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just kind of like an opening for you to talk about process. I mean, you look at the editing or like the juxtaposition of image and sound that you make, and they're very considered. And I don't feel like this is coming just like right out of the camera and then onto the screen. But there's something really fresh and immediate about it.
Yeah, I think I did. I think I did say something like that. I tried to talk about the one of the differences between video historically and film and cinema was this ability to use video in real time because of the freedom that it gave us, right? So that you didn't have the problem of shooting cinema verite in 16 and thinking, my God, I'm blowing a lot of money here in order to get this immediate shot. With video, you just basically, after the capital expense, in the oldest days, you had a camcorder, you had a Portapack, you bought the video, it cost $20, right? And that's why the videotapes were like they were. They were 22 minutes long or they were 62 minutes long. And that's what people did. They worked to the time that they had as a recording mechanism because it was so inexpensive. But it allowed people to really be in real time and to be in relationship to the subject in a way that was different, that was, I think, performative, right? And one of the classic things about video is that video didn't come from an optical mechanical media, it came from audio recorders. So it was really audio recorders that suddenly made pictures, and they made lousy pictures for a long time. Now they make pretty good pictures. But you could basically just say, if I want it to be intimate, I'm going to stand on this person's toes. You could really go up to them, and you knew that you were going to get their voice the right way. And I think that some of the stuff that's happening with Go cams and the new kind of shooting is that same kind of intimacy and the real-time aspect of it. And I think that all of the uses of video by cinematographers or by cinema are trying to replicate a different type of working. And it has complete validity. It's just a very different thing. It's not as immediate. So for me, no, the pieces don't just fall out of the camera, but in a way, I know when I'm right in front of something, when something's really happening, I know how to get it there. For me, it's not post. The post process is important. It's interesting what you can do with post, but you can't make good video with post. You have to have, if you're working with cameras, you have to have the material. The material has to be there. And so that's what I've stayed interested in. And luckily, cameras have gotten smaller. It's become a lot easier to be with people now with video. And get that feeling. But like in the case of the piece with Stephen Harper, I mean, I probably only shot 20 minutes, and I end up with like an 8-minute piece. The ratio is not like 6 hours to 8 minutes. It's just that I just had to take out the superfluous stuff. I had to just keep the thread going. So in a way, that's a very easy kind of edit. It doesn't fall out completely. You have to change the order sometimes or things like that. But that's the immediacy is in the performance and in the relationship, and in the fact that they know you're recording them. And even if they know you're recording them and you don't have permission, there's an aggressive aspect to that. So those wedding dancers, I could have respected their embarrassment, but their embarrassment was just I knew that I wasn't hurting them, and I knew that they were beautiful, right? So I just kept coming forward, and they just kept performing, So they would disintegrate, they would fall apart, and then they would reform, and then it's beautiful the way that happens, and I think that's the gift of being in person with the camera, which I probably never give up, So.
Cameras are getting very small.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? I mean, how would that change your work?
Well, I have a GoPro. I mean, I'm starting to think about using new cameras. I've been working with people with drones. It's really exciting what you can do, but part of camera work has to be about the body, and so I'm not sure how that fits in. I mean, I can't imagine, being really satisfied with a camera on my forehead.
What I meant, your relationship with the subject becomes
Yeah,
different.
yeah,
Since you're
yeah,
just another guy with a camera, and just
Yeah.
with an iPhone, it can take.
yeah.
So that kind of.
Well, maybe you need big, maybe I have to keep the bigger camera, yeah, yeah. The old VHS camera. I mean, one of the things that I always noticed is that I shoot a lot of wildflowers, right? We did pieces together with wildflowers. And people say, well, why are you interested in shooting wildflowers? Well, wildflowers by the ocean are tossed by the wind constantly, right? So they're rooted, but they're kind of like steady camps. They have a beautiful kind of motion. And I realized when I was shooting wildflowers that I had to be like a wildflower. I had to be able to rock to them, and I had to be able to respond to them. And I think when you have a camera and you're with people, whether they're dancing or whether they're just standing, they're always moving, and there always is that proximity. You know, there's the space that you violate. When you violate the space, what happens? You know, when you turn a camera on, why do people smile? Right. So a lot of that's sublimated and it's unconscious. But I don't know. Maybe if I'm just another person, if there are people with all their phones up, you know, maybe that'll give me a different point of view as well. You know, so.